I'm Ernie Humphrey, Educational Programs Leader for Performative, the largest online community for corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Leading and Engaging a Multi-Generational Workforce, Success Through the Ages. 3 generations of employees work side by side in many organizations, Gen Y, Millennials, Gen X, and Baby Boomers. How can your organization capitalize on this unique workforce dynamic? Today we'll hear from 2 industry experts who consult business leaders who will enlighten us as to the defining character of each generation, their workplace preferences, and share strategies to master the generations who lead our workplaces now and into the future. I would like to thank Zoomin, whose commitment to thought leadership helps us make this webinar possible and delivered at no cost. A quick note on today's agenda. First, we'll experience a joint presentation from our featured speakers. Then we'll move to the interactive Q&A session. We will spend the remainder of our hour. We would like this to be an interactive experience for you. So if you have any questions at any time, please go to the questions area and you go to our webinar control panel and send us your questions. We can't promise to get all of them in, but we'll do our best and we'll follow up afterwards any questions we do not get to today. A few logistical notes about the webinar. Links to today's presentation and video recording will be sent out to all attendees in 24 hours later then. Those who would like CPE credits need to answer all polling questions during the event and should have pre-registered for CPE credit. For any questions on CPE credits, please send an email to cpe@performative.com. For those attendees who qualify for CPE credit, a CPE certificate will be emailed to you within 24 to 48 hours of the event. Again, we encourage you to ask questions on today's topic via the questions box and you go to our control panel at any time during the webinar. Finally, you'll be asked to take a short survey today regarding the webinar. We greatly appreciate your feedback regarding our event today, as we always strive to improve the ROI we offer our event attendees for their very valuable time. A quick word about Performative. Performative is the largest online community and resource for senior level corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related leaders. Performative connects corporate finance leaders to provide instant advice and insights on the tough financial and strategic challenges they face every day. It's now my distinct pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Sarah Thompson, Executive Coach and Multi-Generational Workplace Consultant, Lead by Design. Sarah is a certified executive coach who has over 13 years in sales and business management experience with some of Canada's top 100 employees, where she's gained valuable insight into the growing need to design Gen X and Gen Y friendly work environments to retain and motivate future leaders of the business. She now works with boomer bosses to engage, motivate, and retain high-potential X and Ys at her firm, Lead by Design. Our other featured speaker today is Rebecca Heyman. Rebecca Heyman is Zoomin's Director of People Operations and Products. She has been consulting to some of Silicon Valley's most innovative startups for the past 10 years, working with leaders to optimize their investment in people. Rebecca is a senior professional in human resources and holds a master's degree in business administration as well as a bachelor's degree in psychology. Rebecca's favorite thing about her current role at Zoomin is she gets to reinvent the HR outsourcing model for the 21st century at a single source people operations company. With that, it is my distinct pleasure to hand the floor over to Rebecca Heyman. Rebecca, the floor is yours. Please take it away. Thank you very much.
Well, hey, Ernie, thank you so much for those great introductions. And welcome to the call, everyone. Our process today is to talk about generations and define some of the markers that explain them. We'll tell you about opportunities and challenges, as well as some ideas around leadership and engagement, before we end with some trends in policies and technology that you can use and take right back to your work teams. Now, Sarah and I are going to talk about solutions throughout our presentation, so we encourage you not only to take notes, but also to plug any questions into that questions panel, as Ernie told you about just a moment ago, as we're speaking, so we can make sure to cover your questions at the end of our presentation. Now, you saw these learning objectives earlier. You know, our goals really are that you will walk away from our short time together understanding more about common themes that form a generation's work experience and their expectations. We'll tell you some statistics about today's workforce and how those are going to evolve in the future. We'll make sure to touch on engagement strategies for each generation, as well as some leadership styles that you can identify. We close with some ideas around key trends and policies and technology that we can all leverage to work more effectively together. And finally, we hope to give you some actionable solutions to engage your multi-generational workforce to increase productivity. And, you know, as we are talking, I hope that you'll be mindful of, you know, what generation maybe you manage or who's on your team, to think through some different strategies that might be more appropriate for your group. And, you know, we would be remiss if we didn't just start this discussion off with some definitions of the 3 primary generations that are in most workplaces today. Baby boomers, Generation X, and Generation Y. Now, I'll tell you that the years that you see here are approximations. These are not hard and fast rules, but Sarah and I like to leverage the generations that are defined by kind of the earliest academic text on this, which was called Generations by Strauss and Howe, and it was produced or published in 1992. An update to that on the generations at the workplace is a book called Generations, Inc. by Megan and Larry Johnson. And they define generations as a group of individuals who were born and living contemporaneously, who have common knowledge and experiences that affect their thoughts, attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors. And we like to kick off those academic and discussions and talk more casually. I think everyone knows that baby boomers are the millions of Americans who were born following World War II. Because of this great influx of people all born in a fairly short window of time, this was the first time that really a generation was defined. You know, boomers were raised in a very healthy post-war economy. The party line on them is that they live for work and attain a lot of personal satisfaction from work and expect the same level of dedication and work ethic from the next generations. You know, baby boomers were branded as workaholics, but I'd say they're loyal to their organizations. They enjoy the idea of lifetime employment and prefer to be valued or needed as opposed to maybe rewarded with recognition or money. And following baby boomers are Generation X or Gen X. And this generational cohort was initially identified to describe this generation that was emergent from the baby boomers. Sometimes they're children of baby boomers, who are pretty distinctly different than their predecessors. Generation X are estimated to be about 46 million people in the U.S., and so they're kind of small in population compared to the two generations that bookend them. But Gen X are also currently the most likely people to be in leadership roles at your company. Gen X is certainly characterized by idealism and some counterculture. But there was a 2011 publication from CNN that really finds that Gen X are highly educated, active, balanced, and family-oriented, which I think dispelled the sort of materialistic, slacker, disenfranchised stereotype that was associated with the youth in the 70s and 80s. Also notable is that at work, Gen X was the first generation to statistically earn less than their parents. And then that takes us to Generation Y, often abbreviated Gen Y or Millennials. You'll hear us use the terms somewhat interchangeably today. This population exceeds even the population of the baby boomers in the U.S. Gen Y is characterized by growing up with high activity levels and high self-worth. So that kind of traditional command and control management style is never going to work here. Gen Y definitely values self-fulfillment, which can mean more risk-taking and switching jobs. Growing up with the internet certainly means that Gen Y have distinctly different values and attitudes than prior generations because they've had more access to information and also individual expression to a much greater degree. Some of the negative comments about millennials is that, you know, they come from that trophy generation where everybody wins and expects recognition. But, you know, the more optimistic observer, I think, finds them to be pragmatic, engaged team players who really care about improving the company that they're a part of. We have the Gallup organization with their great research to thank for some pretty in-depth work they did on the state of the American workplace. So by the numbers, we've got an equal amount of Gen X and baby boomer workers getting paychecks today. So 44% of both Generation X and boomers make up today's workplace. Kind of makes sense given their ages and levels of work experience. That 4% is primarily traditionalists, so older than the boomers, folks who haven't yet retired or who returned to the workplace. And I know we have 2% of you on the call today. Welcome. Finally, 8% of today's workforce are millennials. And this number is only going to grow and cut into that green pie chart as the millennials age into their careers. Now, generations that are near the beginning of their careers tend to be more engaged than those in the middle, and we're going to talk more about that because we really think employers would be wise to find ways to boost engagement in these middle generations of boomers and Gen X, since they comprise almost 90% of today's workforce. So there is more to come on that very soon, but first, Sarah is going to tell us more about the unique fingerprints to the three primary generations that we are covering today.
Great, thanks Rebecca. And I just want to say hi to everyone officially, and I'm really excited to be here and share this content with you today. Working in my field, I've often been asked, why does my year of birth matter so much? And my sense is that people start to become concerned that if we look at larger generational cohorts, we start to forget about those individuals who exist within them. And individual personality, characteristics, and skills and strengths are extremely important to identify in the workplace. But when we look at generations, we're actually not looking at characteristics, personalities, and skills. We're looking at the common experience that this generation has had and how the events, cultural attitudes, and the beliefs of the era that they're raised in build certain values that show up in the workplace as expectations. And that's becoming more and more of a common discussion as we see right now 4 generations in the workplace. Sometimes we might even be seeing 5 in the workplace, but we definitely have the 3 prominent generations of boomers, X, and Y showing up together, and we see differences in expectations and differences in beliefs. So today's webinar is about how to lead and engage the workforce that is so diverse. And I wanted to show you in a kind of playful way how the cultures we're raised in show up as workplace expectations. So I've chosen 3 cinematic images here from movies of each era that demonstrate the events in the lives of the generation as well as the expectations of the workplace that has shown up because of the common experience each generation has had. So our first movie here is a 1946 release, It's a Wonderful Life. And all the boomers I work with, when I ask them what movie defines your childhood, early informative years, and workplace preferences, all told me It's a Wonderful Life. We grew up watching that movie. We love that movie. And when I looked into it, I thought, what a perfect attribute to the boomer generation. It's a post-war society movie that emanates the hard work ethics that this generation has, as well as their willingness and almost their role that was set out to build our economy. So these boomers were raised in large families, and they were taught to be patient, wait their turn, and the rewards will come their way. And in the workplace, they did not demand anything more from their employers. They kept quiet, get their work done, and do work for the better good of the society. Another result of the boom generation, being that there was a boom in the population, is that this cohort became rather competitive because it took a lot for them to stand out amongst all of their peers. And so they worked really hard to shine, to show up, and to be different so that they would be raised through the corporate ladder. So the culturally distinguishing attributes of the boomers are that they're impressed by authority, they believe that experience is more important than performance, they adapt well to change. Having been in the post-war society, they saw a lot of social change and even headed some of that. And they're very team-oriented yet competitive. Now, let's fast forward to the 90s. And here in the middle picture with Gen X, if I can bring your eye back to the screen, we have, the Office Space movie. It's a cult classic from the 90s that sort of emanates the experiences of Gen X. So it's a satirical look at a workplace that follows the story of a software company's disgruntled employees who are constantly mistreated by a know-it-all boss at a time of downsizing and outsourcing. So this is the first generation who made less than their parents, as Rebecca had earlier mentioned. And they were also the first generation who went home at the end of their school day and let themselves into their house. Both of their parents were in the workplace most of the time. So they've been coined as the latchkey kids. And as a result of opening the door themselves, going home after school and taking care of themselves for a few hours, they've been known to become very autonomous workers. They have a can-do attitude. They know they can get things done if they try hard enough. But because of the resulting sort of friction in the workplace with downsizing and outsourcing, they've also been known to dislike workplace politics. They definitely value merit over experience because they worked in an environment where older and more experienced seniors to them were able to hold on and keep their jobs at a time that they were downsizing. And my favorite picture of them all, the last picture on the screen, our Gen Y picture, is a movie from the 2010 release Social Network. So we've got this kid walking down a Wall Street type scene in his pajamas, and it really just emanates this generation so well. We've got a university student slash punk genius who sparks an entire revolution that changes the way his generation speaks, and that would be the social media website Facebook. Not only does he become a millionaire, but he changes the entire generation's outlook. And the movie really demonstrates the go-get-em attitude of Gen Y and also that casual kind of workplace attitude. Not only in dress, but also in the actions of the workplace. They like flexible hours, brainstorming sessions, and collaboration. This contrasted to the boomer picture we see on the left with a very formal, wearing a suit, serious conversation. It's one of the things that we see showing up in the workplace. 30% of Gen Y also either can have owned a business during their university career or have done one as a side gig during their first career, which they're part of now. Nothing is out of the reach of Gen Y. And what's also interesting is this is sort of the echo boom of the baby boomers. It's the next peak in generational birth. And so we see a lot of that same team orientation, teamwork that we saw with boomers. And right before we move on to the next slide, I just want to share with you, recently I was speaking to one of my boomer clients, and he was telling me that, although there's a lot of commonalities, and when boomers entered the workforce, they wanted a lot, just like Gen Y wants a lot right now. But the difference was that boomers, kept quiet. They were taught patience in their home, and so they brought that to the workplace. And they expected a corporation to guide their careers. They relied heavily on climbing a corporate ladder, while Gen Y, on contrast, takes charge of their own career. They want to, rather than climb the corporate ladder, build their own path and take the initiative to carve out paths within organizations. So that all being said, boomers are, really holding on to those upper rung positions in the corporate ladder. Well, some Gen X are there too. Gen X and Gen Y in general are taking a different and new exciting direction in their organization. So Rebecca's going to lead us into what are some of the opportunities and challenges with this diverse workforce.
That's great. Thanks, Sarah. So, one thing to think about is there has been a delay in boomer retirement because recent recessions are keeping people in the workplace a little longer, but also we have improved health care and longevity. But this is just a delay of the inevitable. We are on the cusp of losing the experience and the insights that boomers offer to an organization. And it's happening at the same time that we're seeing a huge shift in leadership practices. So where leaders used to be the experts on their discipline, they now act as facilitators who engage and motivate others to be the experts. So as organizations see a shift in leadership and demographics, they're going to need to adjust their cultures and their workplace practices to reflect the desires of these new incoming leaders of different generations. And people have those workplace expectations that come along with the new cohort of workers that we just learned more about from Sarah. So as we get into leadership best practices, I want to first look at some of the context around multi-generational workplace challenges and opportunities to organizations. So for that, I want to hear more from Sarah.
Great. So, there's a lot of opportunities available in the workforce, and as Rebecca mentioned earlier, that there can be a lot of commonalities between them, and they can work really well together, and that's exciting. And some of those are, common amongst Gen X and Y, where they're very tech-friendly. They speak a similar cultural language of diversity and moving forward. And so they can work really well together with one-on-one relationships, especially with the Gen X being more of an autonomous worker. But also being able to bridge out into teams, we've got Gen Y and the boomers who are, part of those larger cohorts who like teamwork. They participate well in large projects and decision-making processes. And when handled right, Y and boomers can work very well together as long as there's that respect within an organization. And I think respect is a big piece of just all of these generations getting along better. All three generations have in common a willingness to work hard when they feel like they're part of something, when they know why what they're doing is important and how it contributes to the greater good of the team, the business, or the organization. So engaging them is really about having the right conversations with them about, why what they're doing is important and how they're contributing. And that's something every single generation has in common. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any human being who didn't want to feel valued and to contribute to the larger good of an organization. Now, that's great. I'm an eternal optimist, and I really enjoy the idea of how well we can work together. But the reality is that there's a lot of disengagement happening in the workforce. And with respect to wanting to create a cohesive and collaborative multi-generational workforce, I think we have to first acknowledge some of the inherent challenges that show up when you're working with 3 or 4 generations in the workplace. And I would frame those challenges around 3 specific areas. 1 would be the leadership, 2, the communication, and 3, the engagement. The leadership of today is what Gen X and Y, and even the boomers who are very current on best practices, are looking for in the workplace. They want a different leadership system than businesses have previously run by. And organizations and leaders themselves aren't really certain of how or when or what changes to make. And the reason a lot of these changes are difficult to make is because they're really deep-rooted in the culture of a business as well as in the behavior of those leaders. And it requires a real shift in communication. So when we look at communication, we need to be as diverse as the workforce we're communicating with. We draw from, different workplaces being more complex, there being more access to multiple communication channels in the workplace, as well as the diversity of the generations and the individuals within. So finding a communication system that works is essential to engagement. And engagement's the third point, where we have the differing work styles, expectations of each generation, and then compound that with individual workplace preferences. As a leader, it becomes a little more complicated than previous years to keep them engaged in the workforce. So as a leader, you really need the ability to tune into the needs of the business as well as the needs of the people that you're leading. Which brings us to our next slide on blended leadership models. Blended leadership is something that emanates the reality of that business today. It emanates the diversity of the workforce that requires a diversity in leadership. So Rebecca and I chose 2 fairly popular blended leadership models that are out and available on the internet. And we definitely recommend that if you don't really have a formal approach to a blended leadership style, that you spend some time, just Google search some leadership models and find ones that sort of reflect the challenges or the desires and the direction of your workplace, and utilize an overarching model for your entire leadership team so everyone's sort of functioning in the same way with their team. It creates a more solid culture. And so on the left we have here, with the blue square around it, the Center for Creative Leadership situational leadership model. And that includes knowing when and how to delegate to your staff, support your staff, coach your staff, or direct your staff. And it's not only knowing during what situation to use a leadership style, but with whom you should be utilizing it. And of course, with the different generations, certain generations might tend to lean towards one leadership style more than another. And so, the generations do become important when you are talking to individuals to think, what are they used to? And what resonates with this cohort. On the right, we have Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence model for leadership. And it's a little more complex in that we have 6 different communication styles available to the leaders. So you have coercive, authoritative, affiliative, democratic, pace setting, and coaching. And not to say that more complex is better or worse. It's about knowing what is best suited to your workforce, to your organization. And all of these elements of each blended leadership style are quite simple. It doesn't really become complicated until you're learning how and when to use each one within the workforce. So it's simple to acquire these skills, and then it just requires practice to execute them well in the workforce so that you can see the results in your engagement with your staff. And again, I just want to emanate one more time that these leadership models transcend all generations. And again, everyone wants great leadership. And the difference is that Gen X and Y are demanding it and speaking up about it a lot more than boomers did, because Gen Y especially has been taught to speak up. So it's something that everyone wants to see in the workforce, and that's why there's so much information out there, and something you should embrace and focus on with your leadership team. And Rebecca's going to talk a little more now about levels of engagement and how that works.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I couldn't agree more. Traditionally, we know that people were promoted based on having the best technical skills, right, or being at the top of their game in their department. But anymore, you really, really have to think about promoting people into management and leadership roles who have the right level of emotional intelligence. If you yourself have never attended a leadership workshop, or maybe it's just been a while, we really suggest that you seek out a course or do some reading where you can get and give feedback about how you manage. A good leadership program will typically have some pre-work that includes a 360-degree evaluation where, your peers and the people above you and the people below you get to give some feedback about how you're doing so that those results can be interpreted, so you learn where you're strongest and where you most need to improve in light of this changing workforce. If you don't have the resources, or you're just looking to do a little bit more of your own individual professional development, we definitely recommend picking up some books. Some classics like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or Good to Great. Those have endured because they still hold true for an awful lot of people. There's some new classics, I would call them, like Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh from Zappos, or Tribes by Seth Godin. All of those are great reads and quick reads that can really help this question of engagement, which I think is on everybody's mind. You're probably all fairly familiar with some of those statistics around the companies with higher level engagements have higher levels of revenue, higher earnings per share, all these very compelling statistics. And we bring this up because we think it matters to the different generations. You see here among the 3 generations we've been talking about that the gray bar represents people who are engaged by generation, the yellows are the passives, and the blue are the disengaged. Now, we saw before that boomers and Gen X are 88% of our workforce, and yet they have some of the higher levels of disengagement. Engagement is highest for the millennials, who are a small part of our workforce, but it's probably not surprising given that the millennials, the Generation Y, are the folks who are newest in their careers and probably the most excited and positive about their individual contributions. But with baby boomers, we get concerned because they're a huge part of our workplace, but they also have a high level of active disengagement, nearly 1 in 4. And because this generation is a large part of our working population and may be in the workforce long past the traditional retirement age, we suggest a targeted effort to raise these workers' engagement levels in your organization, because that could have important ramifications for the economy overall. Baby boomers have similar levels of kind of passive engagement to as Generation X, but Gen X tend to be more positive about their individual contribution, and that's an area that I think we want to massage. And then finally, millennials are certainly the most positive about growth and development opportunities, and they have high engagement levels, but the millennials are also the most likely of these generations to say that they'll leave their company in the next 12 months. And more than 1 in 4 of young workers agreed with that statement when Gallup asked them last year. So One thing that's common across all 3 generations in Gallup's study is that focusing on an opportunity to do my best and mission and purpose were the strongest factors for retaining employees. In addition, opportunities to learn and grow was most important for Generation X and Generation Y, while supervisor caring was what strongly influenced baby boomers' levels of engagement. Organizations concerned about turnover could certainly benefit from considering these generational insights and factors when you're thinking about retention strategies. And, you know, conventional wisdom in the past was that you treat every employee exactly the same regardless of their age. And, you know, I think we've seen a trend shift where that's no longer true. It's acceptable and sometimes even essential to deploy different strategies depending on where a person is in their career. So, you know, a boomer will be more interested in a match on their retirement funds than a millennial will. I mean, it makes sense, right? So how about, you know, how we lead these different generations?
So what are the long-term items that your organization needs to think about when wanting to retain, motivate, and engage your high potential employees? So the first one we're going to talk about is learning organizations. And Rebecca just mentioned that in the Gallup report, Gen X and Gen Y were certainly more interested in having learning opportunities and growth opportunities from their corporations. And that makes a lot of sense considering where they are in their career. Learning organizations is a term that comes out of some academic research in the mid-90s and became popularized in the book The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. And this has sort of become a Bible for organizational consultants, if you will. You know, how do you have learning organizations that engage and create productive workplaces? 5 of the defining features of a learning organization are systems thinking, personal mastery, mental models, having a shared vision, and team learning. And learning organizations really facilitate the learning of their employees. They constantly transform themselves. And when I say constantly transform themselves, I'm speaking of the organization constantly transforming to meet business needs around it. And that's capable by allowing the people within the organization to have a voice and to be creative and to take on greater challenges, which are inherent with the structure of the learning organization. So these organizations develop and grow when faced with pressure rather than crumble and close. They remain competitive in their business environments. And it encourages, you know, a more interconnected and collaborative way of thinking on a team so that so that the companies really do become more like a community. And, you know, to go back to us being human, we do really feel connected and committed to the communities that we're part of. So if you can have your business feel like a community that these employees are contributing to, they'll want to contribute more. And so that's a long-term engagement strategy. But it's in the day-to-day actions of the leaders, and it's about what's culturally acceptable in your organization. So a learning organization has a certain cultural standard and leadership style that a non-learning organization would not see. For example, a manager in a learning organization is flexible in their thinking. They're not rigid. Rigidity thwarts learning, and so it's completely conducive to a non-learning environment. You want to be flexible in your thinking, and that allows messages to filter up, down, sideways, across, everywhere. So you have less of a hierarchy when it comes to sharing information. That's not to say that you don't need leaders for decision-making processes who, you know, might have the experience, but it allows the ideas to filter and to percolate into greater things for the company. So what I usually say to my clients, and the reason I've put this Superman picture up there is, you know, how often do you end up rescuing your team when you're a manager? And rescuing your team is something you sort of get taught because traditionally you're raised through the ranks based on your performance, and so you've become a leader based on your performance. But once you're a leader, it's really essential to let go of that and become that facilitator leader who inspires and encourages the people around them to think bigger and to think clearly and to work together to bring out the important ideas for the business. So, not rescuing your team, allowing them to have their own thoughts, and, aligning their personal and professional goals with the organization's personal and professional goals sees great rewards for the business. And it's clear when, you can remain competitive and not crumble under pressure that your organization is allowing an open communication in an efficient way. And I just want to share a little activity that we do in our workshops, and I would even encourage you just to try this ad hoc and in one of your team building meetings, is that we take the room, the workplace room, the day of training, and we divide them into 2 equal teams. So we have Team A and Team B, and we give them a bunch of Lego. And we say, we want you to build the tallest tower possible in 10 minutes. And on Team A, we designate a leader. And every decision has to go through that leader. The leader has to approve the decision and make sure it works with the goal to build the tower. Once the leader gives the go-ahead, the people can do what they've asked to do. And then on Team B, we don't assign a leader. We just say, make the tallest tower you can possibly make. And we give them 10 minutes. And at the end of the 10 minutes, every time, you can guess what I'm going to say, is that Team B has a taller tower. And that's because when you have too much of that rescuing syndrome, that control syndrome at the top of a company, or even on a small team of 5 people, let's say, everything moves slower. Nothing happens as quick as it could because that leader has to stop, think about, and approve every decision that's going to happen. And so the tower gets built a lot slower. But that doesn't work anymore in the business environment today. So we've got Team B, who we said, there is no leader. And what happens is people's natural abilities show up and shine. They make decisions quicker together, and they get things done faster. And they hold each other capable, and people do stand up for the best ideas and start to get comfortable saying what's not a good idea very quickly. So a lot of the politics get pushed aside. And when I work with my Gen Y clients, they say all the time, like, I run into an organization excited, and it's like I hit a wall. And this just demonstrates that. Can you open up decision-making processes and trust other people to be capable of doing as good of a job as you can do? And that's I would say, one of the greatest attributes of a leader is to trust their team to do really great work. Leadership's really about what happens when you're not in the room as opposed to what's happening when you're in the room.
That's great,
I could go on forever about that. I'll let you go ahead, Rebecca.
I know, and I couldn't agree more. One of the things that I find is kind of the greatest marker of a learning organization, too, is how much the organization tolerates failure. How much do they let you try something without reproach if it doesn't work out? And that takes me to another element of kind of long-term solutions to what we're talking about today, and that's career progression. Having a clear advancement path within the organization and an opportunity to, I'll say, customize your work on how it's done, where it's done, and even when. This is definitely an emerging trend for all the generations we're talking about. And career progression anymore is really not necessarily a ladder, but it can be a lattice. And the origins of this theory are with Deloitte, which rolled this out actually as a program to their workforce. It began as a way to keep talented women in the workplace, but it quickly became clear to Deloitte that women aren't the only ones who want flexibility at work. They responded to millennials who demand better work-life balance, Generation X people who needed more time to share child care duties or care for aging parents, and baby boomers who are looking to ease a bit more gradually toward retirement. I think about this, that succession planning is really for your organization. Career planning is for your people. So let's think about some ways that you can be creative to give people, whether it's alternate kinds of lateral assignments and roles, or whether it's letting the people who step up and raise their hand and say, I want more advancement, I want more travel, more responsibility, giving them that step up, or even letting someone take a step back if that's what they need to take care of some things at home so you can retain them in your organization. So really, you have to make sure you prepare people for promotions ahead of time. work on some leadership development programs that align the company's core values. And please develop people personally and professionally, because it really increases retention and engagement. Sometimes it's just something as simple as a leader telling an employee, you know what, I have my eye on you for the next time a director level role opens up. I think you're doing great work, and here's how I'm going to support you to get to that next level. You know, really just showing you care, investing time to understand individual career goals, and have leaders who manage that process really matters to all of these generations. Do you find that to be true, Sarah?
Definitely. I couldn't agree more with what you've just said. And, you know, quickly I just want to touch on the topic of entrepreneurship, which sort of emanates the idea of having freedom and flexibility to make decisions. Entrepreneurs are the people within corporations who take direct responsibility to turn an idea into a project, and all generations enjoy that sort of commitment, challenge, learning, and flexibility that offers. That's another option that you can consider. As well, I liked another point that Rebecca just said. It's about the time that you spend with the people of your organization. And something that I hear from everyone that I work with is, you know, time well spent is what they want to see more of in a company. We're so busy at work all the time that we don't really take the time to set and lock in those personal and professional development goals and align them with the corporation. I think that's just right there the key to success with all generations.
That's great. And you know, our next long-term strategy that Sarah and I have talked about is building a team. And you know, there are lots of ways to define teams, and not only by the generations. We could probably do a whole presentation just on team building, I'm quite sure. So let's, I want to sidestep for just a second here and also just call out that we don't want to do too much generational generalizing. Obviously, these generational cohorts are made up of individuals, as Sarah has reminded us. And as individuals, we may or may not display the behaviors and characteristics or even the workplace preferences of other people in our generations. So just because an employee is of a certain age doesn't mean they fit every stereotype of their generation. It would be better to focus on the teams that you're working on or the teams that you're leading. And one way to build those teams is to think about other ways to describe our work. You know, one way to do this is to use a team assessment so you can learn more about the individual contributions of the people on your team based on their strengths and maybe their weaknesses. You know, Sarah has an example of a team assessment that she does, and it's illustrated here on the left. This is a team of 7 individuals, each of whom has a dominant communication style, marked by the little dots, which moves as they are under pressure, marked by that arrow. And an illustration like this really does need to be interpreted by an expert, but it can help a leader learn the traits of their group and where they need to intervene to get the best impact of people working together. A team assessment is good if you have a new team or maybe a dysfunctional team, but if you learn more about when to apply certain leadership styles to the individuals and the team as a whole, it can really help with efficiency, you know, how you assign work projects, and hopefully ultimately productivity of that team. What are some of the emergent trends in policies and technology that we should all be thinking about leveraging if we're not already? So the first that I will posit to you are social tools. This is the year to integrate collaborative, in-context social functionality into the daily lives of your employees if you haven't already. We want them to be better at their jobs while they're doing them and becoming more engaged and more collaborative. And so, you know, social tools are great because they're democratic. Anyone can contribute, which also means anyone can contribute, I know. But we like social tools because informal learning really expands for people when it happens naturally. So one example might be the way people might contribute together to answers on a wiki tool on a software program, or certainly sharing information through some kind of collaborative site like Basecamp, even tracking work projects and meetings through Evernote. we like these things because they go beyond just some basic discussion forum, how do I do this, and really become much more pervasive and in context to the user's experience. So the key really is to embed some kind of social enabled talent and learning opportunities where and when your employees are doing their work. I know one of the earliest ones for me that was helpful in tracking any kinds of sales activity was the wall in Salesforce as a way to share information with colleagues. So this really helps people expand skills and gain some knowledge from informal learning and collaboration. And Sarah, I think you had an example of this too, didn't you?
Yeah, and I just want to emanate that or reiterate that fact about transparency, that it allows for an open sort of communication forum. And I worked with a retailer once who launched an app so that you could check your schedule via your phone, clock in and out of work, take your break all on your phone. And one of the things I learned in observing how that was launched is that you also have to set an intention and share that with people, because what happened was the Gen Y and Gen X sort of started to think they were being micromanaged when the actual intention of the app is to make life easier. And so, it's just important to have that transparent communication also about why you're implementing the social tools. And I think that's a really relevant learning that we could all take away from, and I just wanted to share that quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. The rollout is critical, isn't it? So another trend, a lot was made late last year when Yahoo rolled back its telecommuting policy, but that really was one example across obviously millions of businesses. And really, telecommuting is alive and well. This is coming together of technology and policy, and you really need to put together whatever technology that will allow your employees of any generation to work from anywhere. So this might mean some greater system firewalls or VPN, might mean issuing laptops, or just giving people permission and supporting your managers with how to lead a remote workforce. PwC, and I probably don't need to spell out PricewaterhouseCoopers for this audience, but they did a study last year, was their Next Gen, a global generation study. And they report that a significant number of employees from all generations feel so strongly about wanting a flexible work schedule, they would be willing to give up pay and promotions in order to get it. Really just reinforces that time is finite and people value it even more than money in many cases. Finally, e-learning needs to get pumped up on some steroids. We can take those learning management systems we've been using for basic, orientation training or maybe that harassment prevention training, and we need to leverage it for more. The Generation Y gets frustrated with the lack of tech savvy from their boomer bosses. And here's a way to give people quick trainings where they're at, maybe on technology tools that are in front of them. There's so much information available that it's nice to kind of get that together into one place. I know that, Sarah, that's sort of the goal of your coaching platform too, isn't it? A library of tools to create some cohesion?
Yeah, we have an online social cafe that we utilize, and it allows for shared experience discussions about the learning and leadership tools that we offer exclusively in the library. And so it kind of cuts down on all the noise around us. There's so many resources available, and focuses us in on the same and the best practices, best resources. And all the generations can get comfortable on those tools, and it's about making sure you set people up for success going into utilizing the tools.
Okay, that's great. And then my last recommendation and trend is get in the cloud. Cloud-based tools, they're priced on a software as a service model, kind of subscriber model basis, so you can be flexible as your organization grows and changes without being wedded to a massive system. I know like here at Zoomin, we do a single source people operations platform that grows with a company and allows individual employees to maintain their own data about their work through the web and through a mobile app. And so, cloud-based systems can be accessed from anywhere, which definitely supports the telecommuting. It's also more secure and easier to get at. So, again, cloud-based systems are highly, highly recommended if you're not already there. So, boy, we have really, really enjoyed this conversation, I can tell you. So just to put it all together, hopefully we've given you a lot to think about and made a case for how you can better understand and address the different generations at the organization that you lead or that you are a part of. Our ideas of the activities you can undertake in support of these initiatives are, for really that we just advocate for improving the engagement and your leadership of your multi-generational team. So think about blended leadership, intrapreneurship, having a learning organization, and career progression, as well as leveraging technology. And with that, we know we're kind of close to time, so we would love to take a few questions before we wrap today.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Rebecca. We do have time for just a few questions. So again, any questions that we do not get to today, we'll follow up with our speakers and get those questions answered for you. First question will be for Sarah. What tools can a manager use to improve their one-on-one meetings with employees?
Yeah, and I love that question because one-on-one time becomes so essential, and it's about how to have the highest impact with that short amount of time. We don't want to waste our time as a manager, and we don't even want to waste our employees' time. And so some of the tools that I can think of off the top of my head that make sure you're being efficient with the time is, at the outset with your employees, and if you haven't done it now, no better time than to start. It doesn't matter if you've been a manager for 3 years, sit down and do that personal goal setting, the mission and vision and the contributions they want to make to the organization, have the discussions to tie that into company vision and career path, which we saw, and be that leader who coaches and coaches them and provides them feedback and manages their progress towards their goal. And one last note I want to make about that is constantly check back in on the goals. People's goals change. They can change within weeks, but it might take 6 months, or as they accomplish one thing, the direction changes. So constantly resetting goals, having a personal and professional development plan, some time set out for that, and there's lots of online tools that are available for you to do that as a manager, and that's what I would really recommend for the one-on-one time.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I believe we may have time for one more question, maybe two. I'll direct the next question to Rebecca. Kind of puts a fine point on things. If we could change only one thing to improve engagement with the multi-generational workforces, what should we change?
Yeah, I would say if you could only do one thing, revisit your onboarding. I know this doesn't officially help the people who are already in your organization, but onboarding is so much more than just, hey, here's where your desk is and here's the company orientation. Onboarding is really how do you bring new employees of any generation into the fabric and the culture of your organization. And, it includes things like maybe a mentorship or buddy program where someone has a more established employee they can work with and go to who is not their manager, can go a long way. Involving executives or founders of the organization. If your company is very large, that might mean a pre-recorded kind of webinar. If the organization is smaller, it might mean that the CEO has a monthly lunch with all new hires. But really, you have to look at how you start and bring these folks into the organization. So I'd take a look at onboarding.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. With that, we're going to have to go ahead and close the Q&A session. Again, we'll do our best to coordinate any unanswered questions with our speakers. A big thank you to Sarah and Rebecca for their time and insights. They're clearly thought leaders in their field and excellent source of information on today's topic. Note in the post-webinar survey you'll be prompted to take right after the webinar ends. You have the opportunity to express your interest in being connected with the speakers with just a few mouse clicks. Also like to thank, once again, today's sponsor, Zuman, whose commitment to thought leadership has helped us make this event possible today. And finally, a huge thank you to the audience for your valuable time. And we sincerely hope to see you again at another Performative event or online at www.performative.com. Make the rest of your day great, everyone. Thank you very much.